special interview, more to explore, and another great opportunity to learn. So, Steve, why don't you do for us a little bit of, some intro into our special guest today?
Yeah, our guest today is I would call you a Des Moines icon, James. Mr. James Biehn, who is a guitar,
extraordinaire.
Oh, so extraordinaire. I actually, in John's podcast, when we interviewed him, I mentioned you as just probably, in my consideration, humble opinion, the best slide player probably in the region around Iowa. But that's my accolades for you, James. And
I appreciate that.
Yeah. I still remember the time when, and we'll probably get into this down the road, but when there was a fundraiser show, and you got up to play a solo, and I just thought you were going to evaporate into the whole universe because it was just so incredible. But James Biehn is the owner-operator of Central Iowa Music Labs, and is had a dream about that, and now getting ready for an expansion out to Waukee, I believe, is where the new studio's at. And Not only does he play music in front bands and do all those kinds of things, but he's a father and a husband, and probably, if I were to think of kind, passionate, and peaceful human beings, James is at the top of my list.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That's going to be good stuff then.
I think it's going to be good stuff. So, James, as I put together a list of questions, one of the things that I figure, hey, let's go ahead and date our conversation here. Mm-hmm. But we are rounding the corner, headed towards your birthday on March 13th, where we will have a pandemic for one full year. And I was just wondering, man, what have you done in your life, or what parts have brought sanity and clarity to you during this hopefully it's once in a lifetime.
Sanity and clarity in the last year. Let me see. It's interesting. Sometimes you just do the work. Like I've spent the last year being everything from, I don't know, like IT person to school teacher to, a little bit of therapist. There've just been on either end, the giving and receiving side of therapy.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's so the pandemic happened. So we were supposed to be on spring break, I think March, 16th of 2020. Then on the 13th, the Friday the 13th, ironically, my birthday, they said, okay, we're going to canceling school for, pandemic. And then we were going to be out of school for a week. And then that turned into 3 weeks. And then that turned into, so long. In fact, this week is, with all the precautions in place, obviously, this is the first week in which my kids have been in school 5 days a week.
Wow.
Since then,
Yeah.
And that wasn't a completely comfortable decision, but you kind of have to, look at your options of like, are they doing well as people and as students? And if not, then what, how can we safely do this? And so, but leading up to this week, I honestly ended up connecting a lot more with my children. I kind of look back and go, okay, well, I'm accomplishing goals and I'm running a business and I'm doing these things. But, you think about it, it's like, I only see my kids maybe 3 hours a day,
Right.
when it's all said and done, because my job kind of puts me, working until maybe 6 or 7, and then they're in school during the day. And then, for all the inconveniences that this pandemic has thrown our way, the ability to, personally help my 6-year-old read and and talk to my teenagers more because they're in the house more, and just, they're, gosh, I don't know, because I don't want to belittle the pandemic because it's been a pain for us all, but those are the silver linings in this last year that I really hold dear, and I can actually look back on this last year and be grateful that I had that, and I don't, and honestly, like sometimes if I think about it in the right, frame of mind, get a little sad that I won't have that level with them, maybe never again, but be grateful that it happened.
Yeah.
So that's, and gigs and things like that. I mean, I'm 43, I'll be 44 here in less than a month. And, taking, over the last, especially like the last 10 to 15 years, taking about any gig thrown my way because, you can always rationalize this, like, oh, I need the money, or this is what I do. And, I'm an artist, and, and that's all valid and whatever. But, that's, once again, it's a time thing, and kind of in reaching this age, my point being with that is like, I was starting to kind of pare down which ones I took anyway, and now, even before the pandemic started, I was really entering a mindset of, my life in this physical form is, statistically about halfway done. And I want the second half to mean more than the first half. I want the quality to be something, because the quantity is 50% done now.
Yeah.
And so I really started to make that transition anyway prior to the pandemic. And, do I miss playing for people? 100%. I
Sure.
love that. That's my love language, as the book says, that's how I know how to communicate with people. And that's kind of like, music for me is kind of like, that's the thing that I don't feel anybody can tell me that I'm doing wrong. Like anything else in my life, finances, parenthood, like, my joke is everything else in my life is a relative struggle, but music is like the one thing where I'm like, I got this. Yeah. But, just, do I miss playing for people? Absolutely. Do I miss, taking every gig I can, especially in the summertime when it's like 4 gigs a week and it's, it's just running ragged. At this age, I've been gigging since I was 15 was my first gig,
Yeah.
Started playing guitar at 12, started gigging, not including, band concerts at school,
Right.
but going and playing like 9:00 p.m. at 15 years old in a, pizza parlor in Boone, Iowa, that kind of stuff, Been doing that as long as I can remember. And I want, if I go out and play again, I'm just as thrilled and happy now, honestly, to be just rehearsing with my band. Like my band rehearses when we rehearse. We're currently, just kind of waiting this stuff out. But when we rehearse, it's like 10 a.m. on the Saturday. And I love that. I can, I'm not just groggy on Saturday morning, I just between late nights and the time it takes away, like I love putting my young kids, my young kids are 4 and 6, and I love doing bedtime with them.
Yeah.
And it's just not at this age, the gigs just aren't, and they're just not worth it in that sense anyway.
Yeah.
But also, the people that have grown up with me and come out to see me play, my joke is kind of like I used to play for the let's get drunk and take somebody home crowd, and now I play for the we got a sitter and we got to be home by 10 crowd. And I'm in that boat too. It's like I don't have ulterior motives with going out to play. I want to play, and I want it to feel sacred, and I don't want to just have it be somebody's soundtrack to their debauchery. And that's all. Like, if that's the mode they're in, fine, but it's just not where I am.
Yeah. it was interesting as far as, like, James and I have a history in that he was my teacher for a little bit. And I believe that if anyone had been out to a Patterson 216 show and heard any original that I had written, James had a little bit of DNA in on those things, as he gave me feedback from the songs that I was writing at the time. And I came to James to learn guitar, but then it evolved into a songwriting workshop. And every week I'd show up and he's like, "Hey, what do you got new? Hey, what's going on?" You know, and it was the good mentor push. But much like you, James, I think the reason why I started a band was I wanted to prove that I could get out in Des Moines and I could book gigs. And then at the time, it was right in and around 2007, 2008, the banking crisis. I was a mortgage loan officer at the time. And literally, gigging kept my house. You know, gigging kept my kids in their cell phones during that time. I was serving tables at Fire Creek and gigging sometimes 3 times a weekend, you know. And, you know, that, talk about back in the day. Remember El Bait Shop having live music? Oh my gosh!
Yeah, they used to have bands there.
Yeah. And I think what they did is they paid bands like 5% of the sales for that evening.
Yeah, it was something like, it wasn't like a flat rate, and it wasn't, I don't know. I understand how business works, but yeah, it wasn't that. Like, you had to love to do it because it wasn't necessarily a feasible thing financially. But yeah, I get your point.
Yeah, but it was hilarious because Patterson. I mean, I think it was a July 4th weekend, and there was a combination of 80-35 going on, and there was a ball game at the park.
Oh man!
And Cubs.
Yeah, and we walked out, and not only did we eat well, but I mean, we walked out with a check, and we're just like, when can we come back? And then the next time, we came back, then it was like, hey, what happened to everyone? You know, and so talk about a unicorn. It was like just one of those moments where it just really had worked out for us. And we had a blast. We had a really, really super good time.
Great beer selection at the El Bait Shop too.
Oh yeah, and I just, you know, but then there was that other motion and movement because soon the evolution of the artist came to the place, and I'm like, gosh, do I want to be a cover band? Do I want to do karaoke? I mean, pretty much we're just going through and, you know, hammering out these, you know, these favorites of everyone else. But on the other side, and you taught me the lesson, you're like, dude, you're not going to create a following by playing only the songs that you've written. You know, you've got to surround that stuff with things that people know. And, you know, and so then, you know, it just...
I call it putting the pill in the dog food.
Oh, man. So I love what you're saying. The other thing that I hear that I think is brilliant is you introduce to an audience that as they hear this interview or watch this interview, you have spoken of a mighty bridge that Father Richard Rohr, a Franciscan priest, brings up, and that you have first half of life and second half of life. And it sounds like you're crossing over that bridge, and the things that are becoming important or have become important are the things that in quality lift your spirit in a way that you never even knew probably was possible, and yet now you are discovering. And so it's in that discovery that you find how holding those babies close really does matter, doesn't it?
I mean, yeah. I mean, not just to me, but to, you know, my hope and prayer daily is that my kids go out. You know, it's so to relate a quick story regarding this. I was at the bank yesterday, and my kid is my oldest biological child. I have a stepson who's older, but my oldest, he's 16, has a job, has a car. And, you know, around home, sometimes you get these 16-year-old emotions and, you know, back talk and that kind of stuff. But went into the bank and they said, "Oh, your son is the one with the hair and the thing," because he had anyway. They described it,
Yeah.
and I was like, yeah, and they all the tellers were like, "I just really like that kid. Like he just comes in and he's so nice, and I'm like, if that's if that's worth putting up with whatever we endure at home, you know, because you do want your children, and I think that comes more from the parents' actions than it does anything you tell them, because they don't care as nearly as much about what you tell them to do. If you're not walking your walk, then it's then it's hollow, you know. But so the fact that they kind of like made it a point to kind of go, "Oh, hey, you know, your kid really treats us all nice and is respectful," and I'm like, man, because sometimes we'll argue about school things and whatever, but at the end of the day, I just like, that's so meaningful to me. Like the fact that he goes out there and is a bright spot in the humanity that he engages with.
Yeah.
You know, and so like that, you know, he's not particularly, doesn't have necessarily any sort of like life goal or plan right now, and that's fine. You know, like I tended to at that age, just because I just, you know, since 12 or 14 or whatever, has just been singularly obsessed with music, and he's not that way now, but I have to remember, like, that might happen later. What matters now is that he is being that person, and I couldn't be more proud, actually. So it means a lot to me that, or, you know, like having those, you know, having a good family bond that way and being able to communicate and everything, that means a lot. But even more so, I mean, he'll be out of the house in 2 years.
Right.
And the fact that he's already kind of going out, and, you know, that has a domino effect, I feel. You know, like if he can go out and be one of those forces that radiate some positivity, gosh, we could sure use a lot of that right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely.
So I feel good about that, and I trust in that.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking, when you're thinking about, you talked about your life, and was there a moment in your life that you would point back to that says this kind of shaped who you were? Is there a moment, or even was it a progression?
There have been like signposts, I think, throughout, you know, like, gosh, I just, you know, I started playing at the age of 12 because I saw a drummer and a guitar player play in the junior high talent show, just two, and there were no vocals. They just did Wipeout and Wild Thing, just one guitar and a drum kit, and it was that whole like heaven's parting, choir of angels singing moment for me. Like no lie, like it was like you know, I think, and I try to relate this to my students, that sometimes like their students or people kind of see that type of thing as like two levels. One, I don't play anything, or two, I'm selling out Madison Square Garden, and there's no in between, you know. And so to see it happening in front of my eyes was really like, oh, you can do that, like, and maybe I can do that, you know. And so a couple months later, you know, that, I mean, it stuck, and I found a teacher in my hometown of Norwalk, which is just south of here, and started lessons. But then, like, the more I went along, and I got, you know, that first teacher was kind of a fundamentals kind of teacher and showing chords and such, and then my next really like 3 or 4 teachers were like, you know, really starting to, you know, set me on fire as far as like what I was really into, you know, the great, you know, the Stevie Ray Vaughan and the Clapton and Hendrix and those things. And and then I would say like it's been a gradual process, but I remember one moment where so every summer in junior high and high school I went to a music camp at Northwest Missouri State, and it was like just a week long thing, and I have gained some lifelong friends from that camp. But we would do jazz band, and we did this Latin song where the band director was like, "Well, do you think you could play a solo on this?" And it was kind of like Latin, but kind of like Santana-ish kind of. And I was like, "I'll try." And I, during the week I played it, and he was like, "All right, you're going to take a solo at the concert. Like this is going to be awesome," or whatever. And I remember like being at the concert and him introducing the song. Like, this is a song and it's written by this person. This person. It's going to feature our guitar player, James Biehn. And, and he was like, "Ladies and gentlemen, this boy is only 15 years old." And then he started the song, and I was just like, what does that mean? Like, it's just like, it was kind of that thing where I didn't, like you kind of, I don't know. I just was really excited about playing, and I had no other aspirations other than that. And, the fact that he kind of pointed that out, it was just like, I can look back on that and see that as a special thing, even though at the time I was just kind of like I'm just here to play,
Yeah.
But kind of, I can definitely like point to that as a definite signpost of like, keep doing what you're doing, know?
Yeah.
And I felt like, so then fast forward to, I think 2002 or 3 summer of 2003, my wife and I had just started dating, and I had befriended, like, if you're familiar with who Derek Trucks is, which I know, Steve, I know you are, just making sure. So Derek Trucks is he's my favorite all-time guitarist, and I had been to enough shows to befriend the bass player in his band.
Oh, wow.
And by that time, especially, because I just started dating my wife, and prior to that, it was just like, I have the night free. Let's drive to Chicago and see and see the band. It was just like I was just doing that obsessively, and the bass player called me and he said, "Hey, I was planning on seeing them in Iowa City the next night, but this was like a Monday afternoon." And he was like, "Hey, we're here early. They got an open jam at the venue we're playing at tomorrow night. Come and hang out." And so I called my then girlfriend at the time and was like, "Bass player Derek Trucks invited us to Iowa City," which is like 2 hours away from Des Moines. And, she was like, "Okay." We didn't have her, my stepson was at his dad's, and we went to Iowa City, brought my guitar, and the band was all just kind of like hanging out and playing pool and whatever else. And I, I signed up on the sheet for the open jam, and I got up and they picked a blues tune, and they pointed to me for a solo, and I started taking a solo, and I was about halfway through the solo, and Derek walks on to the stage and plugs into the other amp.
Oh,
and,
wow.
Like midway through my solo, and I'm trying to not pee myself, and just also, once again, trusting that idea of like, clearly there's something about this. And I try not to take credit for it because I don't feel like I can, in that sense. Like, I feel like, I don't know. It's just, and then we ended up playing like 2 or 3 more songs where it was just he and I, and like a couple of his band members then got on stage and joined us. And, and I have one picture that Jessica took, and I cannot find it.
Oh, no.
This is all pre-social media, and there, I had a little digital camera that you then have to plug into your computer, and I did, like, it's somewhere of he and I playing, like, face to face, playing on stage, and but of course, then we then like leave at midnight, and I call my mom at midnight, like, "Mom, you never," that kind of thing, and just sorry, it's a little bit of a ramble here, but the
No,
idea
it's
of like
good.
these little signposts, these things of like, you're, this is, yeah, do this, like keep doing this, like this is, there are no accidents. This is this is your love language. Like I said before, this is your joy, and it remains that way, and it's, so just, yes, while there's been a gradual evolution with it, there have been things telling me like, this is the route. This is, this is your life. So, and that's where we are now.
One of my favorite times that you've been on stage, and it was a delight to be able to watch, was when your band fronted for Jason Isbell.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I would second that.
Come on, dude. I mean, that was that. I mean, there are catalytic, some different things. Like, I remember when you pulled me aside at the studio and you're like, "Hey, dude, there's this new band. They're freaking awesome." And it was Dawes that you introduced me to. And just to see their progression and development and stuff like that. And I don't even know. I think because you and I had Drive-By Truckers kind of as a commonality group that we listened to, then when Jason split off, I just naturally followed Jason. And the 400 unit, that's the unit in the hospital for the insane asylum, but then it's Jason Isbell in the 400 unit. I'm like, oh, such appropriate Southern humor. I just love that. And then he goes and gets all connected with Amanda, and I'm like, oh, so a little bit of crazy goes a long way, and you've got to keep that close, even when you're skipping out on the bottle, and so. Man, that show, dude, was just, as a friend, I was just so excited for you. And then to get to experience it in that whole thing. I mean, what was it like to share stage with Jason?
Man, I mean, well, first of all, like, you show up at sound check and it's the middle of, so this was at the Brenton Skate Plaza, which in the wintertime is a skating rink, but in the summertime is a concert venue. And they've really, I feel like they've done a good job with it. And, you get there early because you sound check, but you got to wait because they're sound checking first. And then you kind of get the leftovers insofar as like where you set up on stage and that kind of thing, sometimes there's only room for like a drum set and the whole band's up there. But I mean, it was all right. So get there early enough and watch, like, looks like Jason has just gotten out of bed, like his hair's not combed and it's just like, and like Sideshow Bob or something. And like they're sound checking, but they're all like, he and his guitar player Sadler are like discussing like the right way to play Whole Lotta Love by Led Zeppelin and like what makes it a cool riff. Like just in between, like, because sound check's a lot of like playing half a song and waiting for the tech people to do their thing, and then we got up and sound checked, and it was and then they brought another opener who was excellent. Corey Chisel is his name, and they were excellent too. And so we got up, and then we played first. It was still daylight out. Well, it might have been daylight for the majority of the show because it was like it was like a June night. It was great. And so we got to play. Hadn't talked to anybody in the band or met anybody by that point. And I got to bring my son Milo, who's 16 now. He was 10 at the time. And like basically I inundated him with Jason Isbell, who he still loves. It's wonderful. Like he's right now way into trap music, which is fine too. Mm-hmm. But like at that time, like we just get in the car and be like, all right, here we go. And just Jason has an album, Live from Alabama, that I love dearly. And that I just played it all the time for him. Anyway, so, being in the audience while he's like my son and I, like just both screaming every word to Decoration Day, one of Jason's songs. Yeah. And having that moment with my son and, one of our favorite artists. But then at the end, the promoter, who's become a friend of mine, Tom, was like, hey, do you want to meet Jason? And I'm just kind of like, I like meeting people like that, especially if they're a hero of mine. But I understand that they're people, and I don't want to weird anybody out.
Yeah.
And Tom was like, no, it's fine. He's just back there having a cigarette and whatever. And Milo, my son, is with me, and so we both got to go back. And Tom was like, hey, this is James, and and he was like, I know. And then he shook my son's hand. He was like, your dad's a hell of a guitar player, and I just was like over the moon. And could not have been nicer. And asked my son what his favorite song was, and my son said like Heart on a String, which is kind of like a deep cut,
Yeah.
So yeah, it was cool. And he once again could not have been nicer, and I find that most of the people that I've met, in fact, I can't think of anybody who, I don't know. I can't think of anybody who hasn't been like completely cordial and nice, and and once again, trying not to be that weird person of like doing the Chris Farley, like, remember when you were in the band and whatever, like just trying to, if you treat them like a person, that's all they want, like anybody on that level or above, But there's also something to the people that make that kind of music and follow kind of a non-American Idol way of
right
path to their, I don't know if stardom is the right word, but like, like I think Jason Isbell would be happy playing like 1,000 or 2,000 seat venues for the rest of his life. He's not aiming for arenas, he's just like understands like how much of a blessing it is, especially in these days of like where there are a million artists and a million artists, none of which are making money. And, like just understanding where he is with that. And, so that's another example though, of just that idea of like, do it for the right reasons, and the rewards will present themselves.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That was
Yeah.
a good trip.
Thank you for reminding me that I got to do that. Sometimes I don't know, not to be like, whatever, but there have just been moments where I'm like, where somebody says that, and I'm like, oh, that happened. Like, and it's in my mind, it's awesome all over again. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, I know Steve's mentioned that that you've been a mentor to him.
Yeah.
So are there mentors that you have in your life? Do you find mentors to be an important part of the journey as well?
Yes. I mean, definitely. Early on, it was my high school band directors, in particular, one named Terry Hanslick, who was my high school band director. In high school, I was part of the jazz band, and jazz band wasn't, so backtrack. So in junior high, I had no intentions of being in jazz band. I just started playing guitar. I had played maybe a year, and the junior high jazz band needed a guitar player for a contest because the other guitar player had a swim meet the same day and couldn't be there. And so my directors, two band directors, came to me and they were like, well, you play guitar. Let's do, we're going to put you in jazz band for this contest. And I was like, just barely playing like Elvira by the Oak Ridge Boys. And that was like the extent of my ability. I was like, what are you talking about, jazz band? And they were like, well, we'll, if you can stay after school, like a couple days this week and a couple days next week, I think you'll be fine. Total faith in me, more than I had myself. And, gave me, taught me some like B.B. King licks and some things where like by contest time, I was able to actually play a solo, which I had, 3 weeks prior, never ever done, ever.
Wow.
Like, and granted, it wasn't like total improv. It was something where I had to like go over and over and over, and it wasn't a terribly complicated thing, but I had, and then, so that was my entry into jazz band. And then in high school jazz band, we won first place in the state 2 years in a row. And that was a whole other level. And just kind of understanding the correlation, that band director in high school, Terry Hanslick, to this day gets a bad rep sometimes for being like not quite the band director in what's the movie? Whiplash, yes.
Oh my gosh! So he was that intense.
He maybe not that intense,
but very intense.
Oh yeah, like not throwing things at students, but very much like yelling for sure. And I used to joke that he made the trains run on time. It was like that kind of thing. Right. But I also saw the results. And the first year he was at our school, he cut the band program like in half as far as people that participated, because all of a sudden here was somebody that really cared about it sounding good, not about how many people could be involved, which, there are pros and cons to either of those. But
we lost
part of that, which is in New York. And our band director's son is a trumpet player who plays in a brass quintet so the top brass quintet in the country is the President's Brass Quintet. And just under that's the one that he's in, today. And I mean, we talk to each other every once in a while, my former jazz band people and I, almost like the way probably like Vietnam vets talk or something. like I've heard it said like astronauts too. Like there's just a small group of people who understand each other and what they went through, but that was another thing as far as mentors go. Like that's like I understood why he did what he did, and then when I went to college, I called him up and I was like I understand, and I told him as such. Like I said, thank you for that experience. And I at that time, especially my senior year, my parents split when I was a senior. And that decision was made like maybe 3 months before graduation, I think. And it was a thing of kind of like they were especially as an adult now, I understand kind of where their heads were at and what they were going through. But at the time I was kind of like, I couldn't really, I didn't know how to fill out a college application. It didn't seem like anybody was around to help me do that. And I would say he was kind of the adult in my life who, he was the one that told me about the school that I eventually went to. He was like, here's the deal. Like, this is an excellent school. It's a Southwestern Community College in Creston, which is not a big school, but people come from all over the country. They come from Canada. The guy that built that program is a Grammy-nominated, he passed away a couple years ago, but was a Grammy-nominated jazz arranger. And, so that's another thing. I went to this school that just happened to be an hour from my house growing up. And it was, that was like boot camp. People practicing until midnight, then sleeping in the practice room and getting up at 6 and continuing. Yeah. It was, and it helps that Creston, Iowa has absolutely nothing going on in terms of nightlife or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's all you can do is practice, but that was great for me. Like that's all I wanted to do, And so, that, Phil Mattson was his name, and he was, these mentors I find kind of tend to have these personalities that can be very polarizing to the general public. But if you if you understand what they're after, and what their eventual goal is, then I tended to kind of like what's the word? Not categorize, but compartmentalize maybe the negative things and just gleaned what I needed from them in that way. And so it was, yeah. So people like that, it's huge.
Yeah.
I hope I'm not rambling too much.
No, you're doing great. You're doing absolutely fantastic.
Right.
Right on.
Love the stories.
Well, and I love how you take people and you bring them into this, sense of that we are, as humans, we're part of something greater than ourselves. And instead of it being self-serving, or instead of the life that we're living being directly circling around us and it being about the individual, there's something about when you're able to throw your arms around humanity. It's a greater big. I mean, for anything that an individual can do or accomplish, there. Even when you spoke of your son, and you're like, "Oh man, I'm raising a human being who's kind to other humans." There's hope for humanity, you know, and so I in thinking about that, and I know that you've put in some thought as you've scanned the horizon. What do you see, or what would you, if you could tell a group of people, hey, humanity's longing, and this is what we can do together for one another, or in that sense. Do you have any thoughts about that, James?
Oh man,
it's a big question.
It's a great one though. The older I get, the more, and to a degree, this has always been, I think, even before I really could verbalize it, my thoughts and feelings on it. It's like everybody comes from somewhere and has a path that has brought them to who they are. And, somebody that you disagree with, somebody, I don't know, like my capacity for empathy is pretty great.
Yeah.
Like I can kind of look back at moments where I feel like parts of my life I had, what I had horse blinders on, where I was just not really fully aware of the feelings of the people around me, where I made a decision that maybe hurt them. And, it's funny. I actually had a situation, it's not a big deal, but where I felt like it's a long story, but I had a prom date who I felt like in retrospect, like just recently, like I didn't treat her very well, like because I was more interested in hanging out with my buddies than hanging out with my prom date at the prom. And I sent her a message on Facebook just to be like, hey, I just want to make sure we're cool. And that was like, whatever, 22 years ago or something. My point being is that you have to remember that everybody has those moments, and everybody has maybe some bad judgment calls, and and I don't feel like anybody is inherently evil or anybody is inherently malicious. Now, you can do things in your own life to kind of mitigate damage to who you are, because you still need to be a full functioning human to be able to serve the people around you. Mm-hmm. And so, you over time, I feel like you are given lessons on how to do that. And, but you also have to have a certain amount of awareness that can allow you to step back from a situation and kind of say, okay, what is going to preserve me the most on a spiritual level, on a mental level, on, these things, because I don't want to look at anybody or anybody's situation with judgment, with any sort of ill will, and it's hard, especially sometimes now, when people are, yelling at their computer screens at each other. It's not even like if there was a person in front of you, would you act that way? And that is certainly a downside of this quarantine. This is a quarantine in the middle of, among other things, a presidential election, regardless of your position on that. Just there's no capacity for hearing ideas or hearing voices. Now, I mean, if someone's like flat out, touting white supremacy, that's one thing.
Sure.
But I mean, you just gotta, the idea of trying to understand where somebody's coming from. And I mean, these days we fill our lives up with all the gadgetry and all the, we have a phone with us now. There's no downtime ever, and that's, I know for me personally, like that's like I've told myself as soon as my contract is up, my smartphone, I'm going back to like a sliding QWERTY keyboard and ditching all the apps. Would it be detrimental to my business? Possibly. Would I feel more and more human as time went on? 100%.
Yeah.
And technology is obviously great for this. Like, you guys call me from Chicago, and I love it, and I am honored to be a part of this. But I don't know. We are in a position where we're gradually losing our connectivity to each other, and our faith in that idea.
Yeah.
And I don't want to see that go away. I mean, I don't. Gosh, I mean, for many reasons. Yeah. And you always have an opportunity to learn from somebody and to take that lesson and that builds you. Yeah. And so I don't know. I have totally forgotten your question, but I hope what I'm saying.
You're good.
No, that's very good.
I hope that ties in somehow. But that's I don't know. That's kind of where my head's at these days, And I hope that, especially as hopefully the quarantine subsides and we can start, engaging with each other again. I really hope we don't forget what it was like when we couldn't do that. Yeah. That's my fear, is that we get like, for a week we're like, oh, that sucked, and let's everybody hug each other and let's do this, and then a week later it's like, I don't want people to retreat from that. Like, I want everybody to kind of like, charge forward with that idea of like, let's remember how horrific that was, and how, you can base all your decisions in, that book, Conversations with God. You can base every decision is based on love and fear, and I opt for love more than fear.
Yeah. And just to recap, what I heard you say was that other people matter. We can learn from them. That dignity and how we treat other people, that matters. And this is one of the goals of Cut Daisies and Unicorns, and getting the stories of other people out is giving a platform that people would just slow down to be able to listen to someone who's not like them and be able to gain whatever they can pick up from that. And so your answer is very helpful and is a perspective. And I just want to encourage you in that. That is, again, one of the things about you that I would describe you as is you are a man who loves humanity. You love other people. You definitely have a wide margin quotient for others and others being themselves, and yet you're not bashful about saying, "Come on, can't we love each other?"
No, and that's, I mean, especially with a predisposed Midwestern type of personality, sometimes that does not come as naturally as I'd like it to, But once again, like, you have to kind of like push through that and do it anyway, you know, and understand that your thoughts and your feelings are valid, and regardless of what anybody says. And I don't think that coming from a position with love is anything to be ashamed of, and it's not silly, and it's not a hippy dippy notion. I think it's, I mean, every great religious person, regardless of the religion, has said that, and I believe that 100%.
Yeah. Well, hey, we're getting close to the end of our time together. And so one last question for James, maybe to wrap it up.
Yeah, so, well, what I also want to find out, though,
Oh,
because we always like to dig into the thing, what are you listening to right now that you can't get enough of?
oh, okay.
Oh gosh. Like right now I've been very, I've kind of made it a point to, as you go through life, sometimes you hear these bands or these things pop up and you're like, okay, I got to listen to that sometime. And then you don't, or you move on to whatever. I've tried to really make it a point, especially with having things like YouTube at my fingertips, and to go, like, as I'm thinking about it, go, okay, like right now, Snarky Puppy is kind of a go-to for me. They have some videos, like performance videos. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not, but they are.
Actually, my son just told me about Snarky Puppy last week and sent me over some links, and it's incredible.
Yeah, I posted one yesterday that on Facebook that it was the first thing I heard from them, and it's with the guest singer named Layla Hathaway. She is the daughter of Donny Hathaway.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
No longer with us, but she's just the voice. And not just that song, but other things that I hear from them. It's like on a musical level, it's fairly complex. It's, a lot of chords and a lot of things, but I derive so much joy from what they do because they are getting so much joy from putting it out there.
Yeah.
And it's just fun. Like I can sit there with my music hat on and my musician hat on and kind of like get into music theory land and go over that. But like with that stuff, it's almost like so extreme in that sense that I can just be a listener again. Like the downside to doing, being relatively obsessed with music is sometimes I can't listen to something without like, okay, that's G and that's going to a C chord and that's, whereas sometimes I just want to be emotionally involved in it.
Yeah.
And right now they're a band, like I get tears watching the Layla Hathaway song and then some other things that they do. It's just like kids. Like, in fact, Chick Corea, who just passed away, that was one of his big quotes, is like, you should always be childlike with your sense of wonder in regards to music. Like, it should always be a playground. It should not be put in a glass case in a museum or treated as this only academic thing. And if you don't understand it, then you must not be good enough or anything like that. He was just a big advocate for that. And so Snarky Puppy is one. Thundercat is another one. That's kind of funny. Like, this is some of these artists are artists my kids mentioned to me like 3 or 4 years ago, and I'd just be like, you whippersnappers or whatever, and now I'm like, now I'm coming around. So like Thundercat is a bassist out of Los Angeles who has been like the bass player for like the Kendrick Lamar hip hop albums and a host of other things. And his brother is a drummer who's incredible and this and that. And then that Thundercat led me to this hip hop artist named Mac Miller, who unfortunately passed away a couple years ago. Very young. But his lyrics are amazing. And I would say, yeah, right now that's I would say that's where my head's at. I mean, I've really, that's the other thing about quarantine, made it a point to go, okay, I'm going to listen to this. I remember a Victor Wooten quote years ago where he said, listen to the stuff that you don't like and prove to yourself why you don't like it. Mm-hmm. And if it ends up being any reason other than musical, then you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
If something doesn't resonate with you, that's one thing. But it clearly, if you've heard of it, it probably resonates with a number of other people.
Yeah.
And so I try to approach everything with that mindset. But that's, like right now, once again, I try to, listen to things that have quality to them.
Yeah.
And and try to do the same with my children, play, whatever in the car on the way to school, that kind of thing. So, Yep.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, no, it's good.
Yeah.
I'm always looking for new things to listen to. That's the reason why I like to ask.
Yeah.
Well, for Thundercat, go on YouTube and put in Thundercat Ariana Grande.
Okay.
And they play one of his songs together. And Thundercat Thundercat and Mac Miller were best friends, and Ariana Grande dated Mac Miller and was close to him. And so Thundercat and Ariana Grande have this connection to this person that passed away.
Oh.
And I feel like that really comes out in their performance. It's a really cool thing. So I would say, like, if you're into that, then go ahead and move on to the rest of his catalog, because that's kind of that's a good entry point for that.
Nice. Right. Yeah. Always looking for the gateways.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, Steve, did you have anything else you wanted to?
Well, I really like this idea of the question of play it forward. And so I didn't know, James, if you had someone in your life or someone that you would love to hear a podcast on Cut Daisies and Unicorns, that we would, and it doesn't have to be local, or, I mean, it could just be whomever, but you'd like, you know what? Their story needs to get out. A conversation with this person will make a difference for humanity. And I didn't know if you had anybody in mind.
I mean, I would nominate Seth Hedquist for that.
Oh, yeah.
Seth is a really thoughtful, caring person. Also happens to be a guitar hero of mine. Lives here in Des Moines.
Yeah.
Recently became a father, which is a really wonderful thing. I told him, I said, the older I get, the fewer people I think should be parents. I'm not so sure if you should be parenting a child, but he is somebody that I feel like was born for fatherhood.
Yeah.
And not only that, but his musical wellspring is rivaled only by actually his knowledge of Civil War history. Like, he's got these two spheres to his knowledge about things, and I'm kind of envious of that, because it's that kind of like if you start to kind of get weary of one thing, you can kind of shift to another.
Sure.
And whereas I feel like I just don't have that as far as like my areas of expertise, unless you count, raising children, that kind of thing. But yeah, Seth is just I love him to death. I do. And he's wonderful. And he's one of the people, especially, that during this quarantine, I just have not seen and miss him. And
yeah.
But I feel like he has a lot of, he would be a really thoughtful individual for your show.
Oh, that's great. I'm reminded, I've seen Seth at your side playing guitar alongside you at shows, but one of my favorite places I've ever seen him perform is when you guys do the band tribute concerts.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And how you break that down. I mean, what a show. Wow. And all the players that come together to be able to do that, it's just a fantastic outlet.
Well, I mean, like with every other show, I hope to do that again in the future. We try to recreate The Last Waltz, the band's final concert, because they did that on Thanksgiving Day of '76. And we try to do that around Thanksgiving each year.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously this year there wasn't a chance for it. But but he's just, he's also the kind of guy where if I throw a Bob Dylan folk song to him, he's all ears. And if I throw the craziest, like Wayne Shorter, just out there jazz thing his way, we just really get each other on a musical level that I don't have things. That's just the people that kind of I can do that with in my life are pretty rare.
Right.
And and I've valued. So yeah, I recorded an album just I don't know 3 or 4 years ago. That's on all the it's on the streaming platforms, as well as on iTunes. If you care to purchase, that would help me out. I would like that. And I mean, it's like I love to do it, but it's a lot of work.
yeah, man.
Well, that's why this segment's there, so we can talk about self-promotion.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, making an album with musicians is very much a cat herding endeavor. Trying to, So, and then personal social media, Twitter and Instagram. You can find me at James on Guitar. And then my music lesson studio is Central Iowa Music Lab. We've been going strong since 2009. Just opened a second location. And you can find us at Twitter and Instagram at DSM Music Lessons. And so there you go. That's my life in a nutshell.
Well, James, thank you so much for joining us today. And the conversation has been delightful and definitely didn't short us on anything on what I was looking for. So,
well, I really appreciate having me. I listen to podcasts all the time. It's cool to be part of one, especially if you two are involved. Thank you for having me.
Well, I appreciate your time and in the openness that you had about all kinds of your journey. So, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, let's do it again sometime. This is fun.
All right. Thanks a lot, James. We're going to let you go, and you carry on your business back in the 515. And for everybody who's listening on the podcast, we would just encourage you to tune in, go to YouTube and catch James. You'll see him live and real and kind of put some soundscape to the things that we talked about today. And we will continue with our thoughts, Cut Daisies and Unicorns. I think based on this whole thing, we'll probably do a Phil and Steve edition and just kind of talk through some of the things we've discovered. And that'll be an addendum to that. But for now, I'm going to say goodbye.
Take care, everybody.
All right. Thank you.